Let's talk about tariffs. The international version of a passive-aggressive fridge note. They're the economic equivalent of leaving a sticky note that says, "Hey, I noticed you're using my stuff, that'll cost you." Tariffs are taxes a country puts on goods coming in from abroad, making foreign products more expensive so you'll buy local. It's a way for governments to tip the scales in favor of their own industries, hoping you'll reach for the homegrown option instead of the import. Imagine you make widgets, but foreign widgets are cheaper. Suddenly your business is in trouble. Your customers start drifting away, lured by those lower prices, and you're left wondering how to keep the lights on. The government steps in, slaps a tariff on those imports, and your widgets look like a deal again. It's a quick fix, a way to level the playing field, at least for a while. It's a blunt tool, more hammer than scalpel, and it often gets messy. Tariffs can disrupt supply chains, frustrate workers, and leave businesses scrambling to adapt. But here's the twist. The other country doesn't just accept it. They retaliate. They slap their own tariffs on your goods, and suddenly, everyone's playing defense. That's how trade wars start, a back and forth of tariffs that make everything pricier for everyone. Shoppers feel the pinch, businesses lose customers, and the economy starts to feel the strain. Which brings us to our story, the United States and Canada. Two countries with a famously long, peaceful border, and a history of working together. Two neighbors, best known for their friendly border and mutual love of ice hockey. They share more than just geography, they share families, businesses, and a whole lot of trade. For decades, trade between them was smooth, goods flowed freely, trucks rolled across the border, factories hummed, and shelves stayed stocked. But then, one of them built a dam on that river, a dam made of tariffs. Suddenly what was once easy became complicated and the flow of goods slowed to a trickle. And that's when things got messy. Protests erupted, workers worried about their jobs, and politicians pointed fingers. This is a story about steel, aluminum, and yes, even ketchup. Everyday items suddenly caught in the crossfire of international politics. Tariffs aren't just numbers, they're about jobs, politics, and national pride. They're about protecting livelihoods and sending a message to the world. When one country acts, the other responds, and suddenly, everyone's paying more. Prices rise, choices shrink, and families feel the impact at the checkout. It's not just about protecting industries, it's about power, leverage, and sometimes just making a point. Tariffs can be a bargaining chip, a warning, or a show of strength. So why did the US and Canada, two of the world's friendliest neighbors, end up in a trade war? What pushed them from handshake deals to heated debates? Let's find out how a simple tax turned into a full-blown economic spat. Because sometimes the smallest spark can ignite the biggest fire. Because when tariffs go up, tempers do too. Workers, business owners, and politicians all have something to lose, and plenty to say. And as you'll see, it's never just about the money. It's about pride, security, and the stories we tell ourselves about who we are. It's about who gets the last word. In the end, every tariff is a statement, a line drawn in the sand, and sometimes the last bottle of ketchup becomes a symbol of something much bigger. The trouble started with a slogan, America First. It was a rallying cry that promised to put American interests above all else, no matter the cost to friends or neighbors. In 2018, the US government, under President Trump, slapped tariffs on steel and aluminum, claiming it was about national security. The administration argued that protecting American industry was essential, even if it meant shaking up long-standing alliances. Even Canada, America's closest ally and trading partner, got hit with a 25% tariff on steel and 10% on aluminum. The move was shocking, especially since Canada had always been seen as a reliable supplier. The logic? If you can't make your own metals, you're vulnerable. The US wanted to ensure it could build tanks, planes, and infrastructure without relying on anyone else, even its friends. But Canada's metals weren't going into enemy weapons. They were going into American cars, bridges, and even beer cans. Everyday life in the US depended on these imports. For decades, NAFTA made trade seamless. These tariffs felt like a betrayal, undermining years of cooperation and trust built between the two countries. Canadian leaders were stunned. They argued the two economies were so intertwined, taxing Canadian metals was like taxing American manufacturing itself. The ripple effects would be felt on both sides of the border. But the US held firm. Suddenly, Canadian metals were much pricier in the States, and American companies faced higher costs for everything from cars to construction. It was a huge blow to Canada's industry, and a clear message. The old rules were gone. Factories slowed, workers worried, and uncertainty spread. Even friends weren't safe from the economic hammer. The era of predictable trade was over, replaced by a new age of tariffs and tension. The handshake across the border was replaced with a painful invoice. Every shipment now came with a cost, and every business felt the pinch. Now, it was Canada's move. The world was watching to see how America's neighbor would respond to this unexpected challenge. Canada wasn't about to apologize and back down. Instead, they hit back with their own tariffs, dollar for dollar. But they got clever. Instead of just taxing U.S. metals, they targeted products from key political districts. Ketchup, whiskey, orange juice, even toilet paper, each item chosen to put pressure on influential American politicians. It was a strategic, targeted response. Prime Minister Trudeau made it clear, Canadians are polite, but they won't be pushed around. The list of tariffs was public, and the message was unmistakable. Canada understood the American political system, and used it to defend its interests. The polite neighbor had just shown its teeth. The trade war was on. Suddenly, American companies found their products facing new taxes in Canada. It wasn't just about economics, it was about sending a message. Canada proved it could fight back, and fight smart. The world was watching, the stakes were higher than ever, and the pain was just beginning. The moment Canada's counter-tariffs hit, American businesses felt the squeeze. Kraft Heinz ketchup, a staple in Canada, suddenly cost more, forcing tough choices, eat the cost or raise prices. Small boat makers, whiskey distilleries, and countless others saw their products become less competitive overnight. Orders were canceled, supply chains disrupted, and business owners scrambled. The ripple effects were huge. One tariff could impact dozens of companies on both sides of the border. For many, Canada wasn't just a foreign market, it was practically home turf. Now, they were caught in a political crossfire. Years of building relationships and trust were threatened by a single policy change. The trade war wasn't just theory anymore, it was a daily expensive reality, and livelihoods were on the line. Tariffs aren't just numbers, they're people's jobs and lives. Behind every policy decision, there are families, communities, and futures at stake. When governments clash over trade, it's not just about economics. It's about the real people who feel the impact every day. When sales to Canada dropped, it meant fewer shifts, lost overtime, and sometimes layoffs. Factories that once buzzed with activity grew quiet, and the sense of security that workers relied on began to slip away. Take a boat factory worker in the Midwest. Canadian orders dried up, shifts were cut, and paychecks shrank. The uncertainty crept into her daily life, making it harder to plan for the future or even cover basic expenses. For her, tariffs weren't policy. They were the reason she struggled to pay the mortgage. Each bill that arrived was a reminder of how quickly things could change, and how little control she had over decisions made far away. The pain rippled out. Bourbon distilleries paused expansions, farmers sold less corn, and entire supply chains felt the chill. Small towns that depended on these industries saw local businesses suffer, and the effects reached far beyond factory walls. One business owner in New York summed it up. "I've sold to the same guy in Toronto for 20 years. Our relationship was built on trust and reliability, something that took decades to create. Now I have to tell him my product is 10% more expensive because our governments are fighting." That single conversation could mean the end of a partnership and the loss of a loyal customer. The sense of partnership was replaced by frustration and confusion. People who once worked together now found themselves on opposite sides, unsure of what the future would bring. The trade war turned neighbors into adversaries, at least at the cash register. Cross-border friendships and business ties were strained, and the sense of unity that once existed began to erode. It wasn't just about profits, it was about community and trust. The fabric of small towns and border cities was tested, as people wondered if things would ever return to normal. The real cost was measured in lost jobs, strained friendships, and uncertainty. For many, the hardest part was not knowing when, or if, the hardship would end. For many, the damage was personal. It was about missed opportunities, dreams put on hold, and the daily stress of making ends meet. The numbers on a spreadsheet couldn't capture the anxiety in people's lives. Behind every statistic was a story of resilience, fear, and hope for something better. The trade war was a political game, but the consequences were painfully real. Decisions made in government chambers echoed through factory floors and kitchen tables alike. It was a lesson in how quickly things can fall apart. The chain reaction was swift, and the recovery would be slow and uncertain. And how hard it is to put them back together. Rebuilding trust, jobs, and livelihoods would take time, effort, and a renewed sense of cooperation. All over a few lines on a tariff list, lines that changed lives in ways no one could have predicted. Canada's counter-tariffs got Washington's attention fast. Suddenly, Congress members were flooded with calls from angry businesses and workers. What started as a foreign policy move became a local crisis. Politicians who once supported tariffs now faced pressure to change course. The White House tried to stand firm, but the stories of layoffs and lost sales made headlines. Canada's targeted response proved surprisingly effective, forcing a political scramble in D.C. The U.S. realized Canada wasn't just a passive partner, it could hit back, and hard. Months of pain and pressure finally forced both sides to the table. Negotiations to update NAFTA, now the USMCA, became tied to ending the tariffs. Canada refused to sign a new deal until the metal tariffs were gone. In May 2019, a breakthrough, the US, Canada, and Mexico agreed to drop all tariffs. There was no clear winner, just relief. Industry celebrated, and business slowly returned to normal. The trade war ended not with a bang, but with a tired handshake. The lesson: even the friendliest neighbors can fight, but they're better off talking. So what did we learn? Trade wars aren't easy or winnable, they're messy and hurt everyone. The US learned allies can fight back. Canada learned not to rely so heavily on one partner. Both sides realized how much they depend on each other for prosperity. The trade war was a wake-up call. Stability is valuable and cooperation beats conflict. The ketchup tariffs and whiskey wars became a cautionary tale. Even the best relationships can be tested by politics. In the end, everyone paid a price for building walls, even if they were made of taxes. Let's hope future leaders remember that lesson.